I thought we were celebrating my 28th birthday when my mother dropped the bomb that shattered my world. Sitting around the kitchen table in my grandmother's house where I had lived for 2 years, she looked me dead in the eye and said those words that still echo in my nightmares. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. Your sister owns that house now." The fork slipped from my hand as I stared at her in disbelief. This was the same house I had poured my heart soul and every paycheck into maintaining since Grandma Rose passed away. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. The silence that followed my mother's announcement felt like drowning in slow motion. My father Robert sat there avoiding my gaze while my sister Emma smirked from across the table like she had just won the lottery. I had sacrificed everything for this house, for this family, and now they were throwing me out like yesterday's trash. 2 years ago, when Grandma Rose died peacefully in her sleep, I made the decision to move back into her house. I had been living in a cozy apartment downtown with my boyfriend Jake, planning our future together. But someone needed to take care of the property, and my parents were too busy enjoying their retirement in their Florida community to be bothered. Emma was chasing her acting dreams in Los Angeles, sending occasional selfies from auditions, but never a dime to help with expenses. So I stepped up. I broke my lease, ended my relationship with Jake, because he could not understand why I was choosing family responsibility over our plans together, and moved into the 3-bedroom colonial that held every precious memory of my childhood. The house needed constant attention. The roof leaked during winter storms, the heating system groaned like an old man climbing stairs, and the property taxes alone cost me $3,000 every 6 months. Working as an ICU nurse at Memorial Hospital, I picked up every available shift to cover the mounting expenses. Double shifts became my norm. I painted the exterior walls myself during my days off, learned to fix leaky faucets from YouTube videos, and spent my entire savings account on a new water heater when the old one finally gave up last winter. Every penny of my $45,000 salary went straight into maintaining this house that my grandmother had loved so dearly. My parents visited maybe twice in those 2 years, always with excuses about the long drive from their gated community in Tampa. Emma called occasionally, usually when she needed money or wanted to complain about her latest failed audition. Neither of them ever asked how I was managing financially or emotionally. They just assumed I would handle everything like I always did. After my mother's shocking announcement, I waited until they left before I started searching. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. How could Emma suddenly own a house she had never lived in or contributed to? I started in my father's study, a small room filled with his old law books and filing cabinets that he claimed contained important family documents. Hidden behind a stack of tax returns from 1998, I found a manila envelope that made my blood run cold. Inside were legal documents dated 6 months ago, transferring ownership of the house from my parents to Emma. My signature appeared on several pages, but I had never seen these papers before in my life. The notary stamp was from a firm in Tampa near where my parents lived. My hands shook as I called the law office that had handled the transfer. The receptionist put me through to Mr. Davidson, the attorney who had processed the paperwork. "Oh yes, I remember that transaction," he said when I identified myself. "Your parents brought all the signed documents. You had already signed everything they said you were too busy working to come in person." "Sir, I never signed any of those documents," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. The long pause on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "Miss Regina, if that's true, then we have a serious problem. Forging signatures on property transfers is a felony." After hanging up, I sank into my grandmother's favorite armchair and tried to process what was happening. My own parents had forged my signature to steal the house I had been caring for, but why would they give it to Emma instead of keeping it themselves? The answer came when I found my father's cell phone, which he had left charging in the kitchen. I should not have looked, but desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. The text messages between him and Emma painted a picture that made me physically sick. "Dad, once the house is in my name, I already have buyers interested. We can split the $300,000 profit like we discussed. Regina will never know what hit her." Good. She's been living there rent-free long enough. Time for her to learn some independence. Just make sure she doesn't suspect anything until it's too late to fight it. I screenshotted every message before my father came looking for his phone. Emma had never intended to live in this house. She was planning to sell it immediately and pocket the money, cutting me out entirely after I had spent 2 years of my life keeping it from falling apart. That night I lay in my grandmother's bed and cried until no more tears would come. The people I had sacrificed everything for had been plotting against me for months. They saw me as nothing more than a convenient caretaker until they could cash in on Grandma Rose's legacy. But as the sun rose the next morning, something inside me hardened. I was not going to roll over and let them destroy me. I had 48 hours to figure out how to fight back, and I was going to use every minute. I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year, knowing that what I needed to accomplish in the next 2 days was more important than any shift I had ever worked. My supervisor, Patricia, was understanding when I explained there was a family emergency. She had no idea how accurate that description really was. My first call was to Jake, even though we had barely spoken since our breakup. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious but not hostile. "Regina, is everything okay?" "Jake, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone from my family contacted you recently, like in the past few months?" There was a pause that made my stomach drop. "Actually, yes. Your sister Emma called me about 4 months ago. She said she was worried about your finances and wanted to know if you had mentioned any money problems. I thought it was sweet that she cared." "What did you tell her?" "Just that you were working a lot of overtime and seemed stressed about house expenses." "Why, what's going on?" I explained the situation, and Jake's anger was immediate and fierce. "Regina, that's fraud. You need to contact a lawyer immediately." "I know. I'm working on it. But Jake, I'm scared. These are my parents. I don't understand how they could do this to me. Because they're not thinking of you as their daughter right now. They're thinking of you as an obstacle to money." After we hung up, I drove to Mrs. Patterson's house next door. She was 82 years old and had been my grandmother's closest friend for over 30 years. If anyone knew about my grandmother's true wishes for the house, it would be her. Mrs. Patterson invited me in for coffee, her kitchen still smelling like the chocolate chip cookies she baked every Tuesday. Her blue eyes, sharp despite her age, studied my face with concern. "Child, you look like you haven't slept in a week. What's troubling you?" I told her everything and watched her face grow dark with anger. "Those vultures," she muttered. "Your grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she knew what Robert and Linda were doing." Mrs. Patterson, did my grandmother ever mention anything about the house, about what she wanted to happen to it? The elderly woman stood up and walked to her kitchen window, looking across at the house that had been my sanctuary for 2 years. "Regina, your sister came by here about 6 months ago asking all sorts of questions about the property value and what your grandmother had said about inheritance. I should have seen the warning signs then." "What kind of questions?" She wanted to know if Rose had ever mentioned updating her will, if she had talked about selling the house, if there were any valuable items inside that she should know about. I told her she should ask you since you were the one taking care of everything, but she said she wanted to surprise you by helping with some of the financial burden. My heart sank. Emma had been planning this for even longer than I realized. "Mrs. Patterson, is there anything else you can remember? Anything my grandmother said about her wishes?" The old woman turned back to me with a sly smile. As a matter of fact, there is. Your grandmother gave me something to keep safe said. If anything ever happened and you needed it, I should give it to you. She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small key attached to a piece of paper with my grandmother's handwriting. Safety deposit box at First National Bank. She made me promise to only give this to you if someone tried to take the house away from you. My hands trembled as I read my grandmother's note. Regina, if you're reading this, then someone is trying to steal what I left for you. Everything you need is in box 207. You were the only one who truly loved me, not my money. Fight for what's yours. Love, Grandma Rose. The drive to First National Bank felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. The bank manager, Mr. Thompson, remembered my grandmother and expressed his condolences again as he led me to the safety deposit box room. Inside box 207, I found documents that changed everything. My grandmother's original will, dated just 3 weeks before her death, left the house specifically to me. But more importantly, there was a letter explaining why she had hidden this will instead of filing it with her attorney. Regina, the letter began, I discovered that your parents have been stealing from my accounts for years. They think I'm too old and confused to notice, but I see everything. I've hired a private investigator to document their theft, and I'm changing my will to protect you. They must never know about this until you need it. There's also a bank account I've been keeping secret with money specifically for house maintenance and repairs. The account number is below. The bank account contained $47,000, more than enough to cover all the expenses I had been struggling with. My grandmother had been watching over me even after death, knowing that her son would try to take advantage of my loyalty and love. But the most shocking discovery was the private investigator's report. For 3 years before her death, my parents had been systematically stealing from my grandmother's pension checks and savings accounts. They had taken over $60,000 money that was supposed to help pay for her care and maintain the house. I made copies of everything and drove straight to the legal aid office downtown. The attorney assigned to me was Sarah Chen, a sharp woman in her 30s who specialized in elder fraud cases. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of fraud I've seen, she said after reviewing the documents. Not only did they forge your signature, but the original property transfer to your parents was fraudulent because your grandmother's real will was never probated. Legally, this house has been yours since the day she died. What can we do? We can do a lot. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing an emergency injunction to prevent any sale of the property. We're also filing criminal complaints against your parents for fraud and forgery. As for your sister, if she proceeds with trying to take possession knowing the transfer was fraudulent, she becomes an accessory to the crime. That evening, I spent hours documenting every repair I had made, every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made for the house. I photographed receipts, maintenance records, and improvement projects. I was building a case that would prove beyond any doubt that I was the rightful owner both legally and morally. As I sat in my grandmother's kitchen surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger, but power. Tomorrow, when Emma arrived expecting to find an empty house and a defeated sister, she was going to discover that I was no longer the pushover she remembered. I was ready for war. The moving truck pulled into the driveway at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, followed by Emma's silver BMW that I recognized from her Instagram posts. Through the living room window, I watched my sister step out of her car, wearing designer jeans and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was arriving at a resort instead of coming to steal her sister's home. Her boyfriend Brad climbed out of the passenger seat, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair who I had seen in her social media photos. He immediately started directing the 3 movers toward the front door like he owned the place. Emma strutted up the front steps and tried to use her key, but I had changed the locks the night before. When the door would not open, she pounded on it with her fist. "Regina, open this door right now. I know you're in there." I took a deep breath and opened the door, standing calmly in the doorway with my arms crossed. Emma's confident smirk faltered slightly when she saw that I was still there, clearly not planning to leave. "What are you still doing here?" she demanded. "I told you to be out by today." "Actually, Mom told me to be out. You weren't even here for that conversation, and as you can see, I'm not going anywhere." Brad stepped forward, trying to intimidate me with his height. "Look, lady, we've got a truck full of furniture and movers who are charging by the hour. You need to move your stuff out so we can move ours in." "I'm not moving anything," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "This is my house." Emma laughed, but it sounded forced and shrill. "Your house, Regina. You're living in a fantasy. I have the deed. I own this property now." "Really, let me see that deed." Emma fumbled in her oversized purse and pulled out a folder of documents. As she handed me the papers, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The confidence was just an act. I glanced at the documents, recognizing the same fraudulent paperwork I had found in my father's study. "These documents are worthless, Emma. The signatures are forged." "That's ridiculous. Dad handled all the legal work. Everything is perfectly legitimate." "Is it? Because I've already spoken with an attorney and we've filed papers with the court. This property transfer is fraudulent, and you're about to become an accessory to a felony if you don't leave right now." Brad looked between Emma and me, clearly not understanding what was happening. "Emma, what is she talking about?" "You said this was all settled." "It is settled," Emma snapped, but her voice was getting higher and more panicked. "Regina is just being dramatic because she can't accept that she lost." "Lost what exactly?" I asked. "Lost the house that I've been paying for and maintaining for 2 years while you were in California pretending to be an actress." Emma's face flushed red. "Pretending I'll have you know that I've been working very hard on my career?" "Really, because Brad here might be interested to know that according to your unemployment records, which are public information, you haven't worked a single day in the past 8 months. Brad's head snapped toward Emma. "Unemployment records, Emma. You told me you've been getting regular auditions. You said you just booked a commercial last month." Emma's composure was cracking. "Regina, you have no right to investigate my personal business." "I have every right to investigate fraud when it involves my property. Speaking of which, Emma, why don't you tell Brad about your real plan for this house?" "What plan?" I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots of the text messages. "The plan where you sell this house immediately for $300,000 and split the profit with Mom and Dad, leaving me with nothing after I spent my life savings keeping it from falling apart." Brad grabbed the phone and read the messages, his face growing darker with each line. "Emma, what the hell is this? You told me we were going to live here, that this was our fresh start." "Brad, I can explain." "You can explain how you lied to me about everything, how you've been unemployed this whole time, how you're planning to commit fraud." Emma's voice became desperate. "It's not fraud. This is my family's house. I have every right to it." "Actually, you don't," I said, pulling out the court documents Sarah had prepared. "As of this morning, there's a legal injunction preventing any sale or transfer of this property. If you attempt to take possession, you'll be arrested for trespassing and fraud." The movers, who had been standing awkwardly by their truck during this entire exchange, started walking back toward their vehicle. "Lady," one of them called to Emma, "we're not getting involved in a family legal dispute. You'll need to sort this out and call us back." As the moving truck pulled away, Emma turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, I'm calling the police right now. I'll have you arrested for trespassing." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Call them. I'd love to show them the evidence of your fraud scheme." Emma fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, putting the call on speaker. When the dispatcher answered, Emma's voice was sugar-sweet and innocent. Yes, I need police assistance. My sister is trespassing in my house and refusing to leave. Ma'am, do you have documentation proving ownership of the property? Yes, I have the deed right here. And has this person been living there previously? Emma hesitated. Well, yes, but... Ma'am, this sounds like a civil dispute that needs to be resolved in court. Unless there's an immediate threat of violence, this isn't a matter for emergency police response. After Emma hung up, she tried calling our parents, but they were not answering. She left increasingly frantic voicemails demanding that they call her back and fix this situation. Brad was leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. Emma, I just looked up your sister's name in the court records. There really is an injunction filed today. This whole thing is legitimate. Brad, you don't understand. This house is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. We can fight this in court and win. There's no we anymore, Emma. I'm not getting involved in criminal fraud. I'm driving back to California tonight. You can't leave me here. Watch me. As Brad drove away, leaving Emma standing alone in the driveway, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I was winning this battle, but the cost was watching my family destroy itself through greed and deception. Emma turned back to me, her designer sunglasses now hiding what I suspected were tears. Regina, can we talk? Maybe we can work something out. The time for working things out was 2 years ago when I moved in here and started sacrificing everything for this family. But you and our parents saw me as a convenience, not a person. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you offered to help with expenses or repairs? When was the last time you treated me like family instead of like hired help? Emma could not answer because she knew I was right. As she walked back to her car, I realized that the recording app on my phone had been running the entire time. Every word she had said, every admission about the fraud, every detail about her plans was now documented evidence. When her car disappeared down the street, I closed the front door and leaned against it, feeling emotionally drained, but victorious. Emma had wished she had never stepped inside, and she was right to feel that way. This was just the beginning of the consequences she would face for underestimating me. Monday morning arrived with the sound of my phone ringing at 7:30. Sarah Chen was calling with news that made me sit up straighter in my grandmother's bed. Regina, I filed the emergency injunction on Friday afternoon, and the judge has granted it. No one can sell, transfer, or take possession of that property until this case is resolved. But there's more. I also filed criminal complaints with the district attorney's office over the weekend. Criminal complaints. Fraud in the first-degree forgery and elder financial abuse. Your parents could be looking at serious prison time if convicted. As for Emma, she's now officially involved in a conspiracy to commit fraud. I had never imagined that my family's betrayal would escalate to criminal charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah explained that the district attorney's office took elder fraud cases very seriously, especially when they involved forged documents and stolen inheritance. By 10 o'clock that morning, Emma's potential buyers had received legal notice that the property sale was subject to litigation and fraud investigation. The young couple who had planned to purchase the house for their growing family called Emma in a panic, demanding their earnest money back immediately. Emma called me screaming into the phone. Regina, you're destroying everything. These people are threatening to sue me for fraud. That's because you committed fraud, Emma. What did you think was going to happen? I thought you would just accept it and move on. I never thought you would fight this hard. That was your mistake. You thought I was the same pushover who let everyone walk all over her, but living in this house, taking care of Grandma's legacy, it changed me. I'm not backing down. Emma's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. She and Brad had been staying at a luxury hotel near the beach for the past week, running up charges on her credit card while waiting for the house sale to go through. now with no sale and no boyfriend to split the costs, she was burning through what little money she had left. Meanwhile, I contacted Channel 7 News after Sarah suggested that media attention might help prevent other families from experiencing similar fraud. The consumer protection reporter Jennifer Walsh was fascinated by the case. "This hits on so many issues that our viewers face," she told me during our phone interview. "Elder fraud, family betrayal, property theft. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview?" The news segment aired on Wednesday evening, featuring interviews with me, Mrs. Patterson, and Sarah Chen. They also included statistics about how common elder fraud had become, with family members stealing billions of dollars from elderly relatives every year. My parents, watching from their retirement community in Florida, panicked when they saw themselves mentioned by name in a news report about criminal fraud. They immediately booked flights back to our hometown, arriving Thursday morning with a lawyer in tow. Their attorney, Mr. Bradshaw, called Sarah to request a meeting. "My clients are willing to negotiate a settlement to avoid criminal prosecution." "Your clients committed multiple felonies," Sarah responded coldly. "They forged their daughter's signature on legal documents and stole property that rightfully belonged to her under her grandmother's will. What exactly do they think they're negotiating?" The meeting took place in Sarah's office on Friday afternoon. My parents looked older and more fragile than I remembered, but I reminded myself that they had caused this situation through their own greed and dishonesty. "Regina," my mother began, "we never meant for things to go this far. We just thought." "You thought what, Mom? That I was too stupid to figure out what you were doing? That I would just accept being robbed by my own family?" My father, who had barely made eye contact since arriving, finally spoke up. "We were trying to protect you from the responsibility of owning property. We thought Emma could handle the financial aspects better. By selling it immediately and keeping all the money, how exactly does that protect me?" Mr. Bradshaw interrupted. "My clients are prepared to offer full restitution for any money you've spent on the property, plus an additional $25,000 in damages." Sarah shook her head. "That's not even close to acceptable. Your clients have committed crimes that carry potential prison sentences. They've put my client through emotional trauma that has affected her work, her relationships, and her health. We're seeking full ownership of the property, $50,000 in damages, all legal fees, and restitution for the money they stole from the grandmother before her death." $50,000, that's outrageous," my mother protested. "What's outrageous is stealing from an elderly woman and then trying to steal from her granddaughter," I said quietly. "What's outrageous is making me think I was alone in the world while you plotted to take away the only thing I had left of Grandma Rose." The negotiations continued for hours, but my parents' position grew weaker as Sarah presented more evidence. The private investigator's report showed a pattern of financial abuse that went back years. The forged signatures were obvious to handwriting experts. The timeline of events proved premeditation and conspiracy. As evening approached, Mr. Bradshaw advised his clients to accept our terms rather than face criminal trial. The settlement agreement gave me full ownership of the house, with clear title, $50,000 in damages, all legal fees paid, and restitution for the money stolen from my grandmother's accounts. But the most surprising revelation came when Sarah presented one final document. "During our investigation, we discovered that your grandmother had established an additional trust account that your parents were never told about. Regina, you've inherited another $200,000 that was hidden in a separate bank." The look of shock and defeat on my parents' faces told me everything I needed to know. They had thought they were stealing my entire inheritance, but my grandmother had been several steps ahead of them. As we left the lawyer's office that evening, my father tried to approach me in the parking lot. "Regina, please, we're still family. Can't we find a way to move past this?" I stopped and looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework for 12 years. Dad family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge signatures and commit fraud. Family doesn't conspire to leave their daughter homeless and broke. You made your choice when you decided to treat me like an enemy instead of your daughter. We made a mistake. We can fix this. Some mistakes can't be fixed. They can only be learned from. Maybe now you'll understand what Grandma Rose understood about the difference between loving someone and loving what they can do for you. As I drove home to my house truly, my house now, I reflected on how much I had changed in just 1 week. The scared, betrayed woman who had received that ultimatum was gone. In her place was someone who understood her worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. But this was only the beginning. Emma was still facing criminal charges, and there were more revelations to come that would reshape my understanding of my family forever. The preliminary court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, and as I sat in the gallery watching Emma enter with her court-appointed attorney, I barely recognized my sister. Gone were the designer clothes and confident swagger. She looked thin, exhausted, and defeated. What I did not expect was the testimony from Mr. Harrison, the private banker, who had handled my grandmother's accounts for over 20 years. He took the witness stand and revealed details that shocked everyone in the courtroom. Mrs. Rose Patterson came to see me approximately 6 months before her death, he testified. She was extremely agitated and concerned about unauthorized withdrawals from her checking account. When we investigated, we discovered that someone with access to her account information had been making regular transfers to external accounts. The prosecutor asked, "Were you able to identify who was making these transfers?" Yes. The transfers were being made to accounts belonging to Robert and Linda Patterson, the defendant's parents. Over a 3-year period, they had stolen approximately $68,000 from Mrs. Patterson's pension and savings accounts. I watched my parents sitting in the row behind Emma as their faces turned pale. They had no idea that their theft had been documented so thoroughly. But Mr. Harrison was not finished. Mrs. Patterson was so concerned about continued theft that she hired a private investigator and changed her will without telling her family. She also established a separate trust account and moved most of her assets there to protect them. The private investigator Daniel Murphy testified next. His surveillance reports painted a picture of systematic financial abuse that went far beyond what I had imagined. I documented multiple instances of Robert and Linda Patterson using their mother's credit cards for personal expenses, forging her signature on checks, and accessing her bank accounts without permission, he explained. Mrs. Patterson was aware of the theft but was afraid to confront them directly. She worried that they would retaliate by preventing her from seeing her granddaughter, Regina. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. My grandmother had known about the theft, but had stayed silent to protect our relationship. She had suffered in silence while her own son robbed her all because she loved me and did not want to lose me. The prosecutor presented evidence that Emma had not been an innocent victim manipulated by our parents. Phone records showed that she had been actively involved in planning the fraud for over a year. The defendant contacted multiple real estate agents 6 months before the alleged property transfer, the prosecutor stated. She inquired about property values, closing timelines, and how quickly a house could be sold. This demonstrates clear premeditation and conspiracy. Emma's attorney tried to argue that she had been misled by our parents about the legitimacy of the property transfer, but the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, phone calls, and email communications proved that Emma knew exactly what was happening and had been the driving force behind much of the planning. During cross-examination, Emma's true character emerged. When asked why she had never contributed to the house expenses despite planning to inherit the property, her answer was telling. "I assumed Regina was living there rent-free so she should pay for everything. I was building my career in California. I had my own expenses." Were you aware that your sister had given up her apartment and ended a relationship to care for the family property? That was her choice. No one forced her to do that. Were you aware that she was working double shifts as a nurse to cover property taxes and maintenance costs? She's a nurse. She makes good money. She could afford it. The callousness in Emma's responses created a visible reaction in the courtroom. Even the judge seemed taken aback by her complete lack of empathy or remorse. But the most damaging testimony came from Mrs. Patterson, my grandmother's neighbor, who revealed that Emma had visited her multiple times, asking detailed questions about the house and my grandmother's finances. She wanted to know if Rose had any valuable jewelry or artwork, if there were any other properties, if Regina knew about any hidden assets, Mrs. Patterson testified. I became suspicious because she seemed more interested in Rose's possessions than in Rose herself. The final piece of evidence was a recording that I had not known existed. My grandmother had apparently recorded a conversation with Emma during one of her visits using a small device that her home security company had provided for her safety. In the recording, Emma's voice was clear and calculating. "Grandma Rose, you need to think about what happens to this house when you're gone. Regina can't handle that kind of responsibility. She's always been the weak one in the family. I could take care of everything for you. Emma, dear, Regina has been taking wonderful care of me in the house. I don't know what I would do without her. But Grandma, she's just playing nice because she wants your money. I love you for who you are, not what you have." Hearing my sister manipulate my dying grandmother was almost unbearable. The recording continued with Emma suggesting that the house should go to someone who could properly manage the financial aspects, meaning herself. When the recording finished playing, the courtroom was silent. Emma was crying, but they seemed like tears of self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Judge Martinez addressed Emma directly. "Miss Patterson, you have not only committed serious crimes against your sister, but you attempted to manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman in the final months of her life. Your actions show a pattern of predatory behavior that this court cannot ignore." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Emma was sentenced to 5 years probation, ordered to pay restitution of $75,000 to me, and required to complete community service working with elderly fraud victims. Additionally, her felony conviction would remain on her record permanently. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the judge's decision to order my parents to sell their Florida retirement home to pay full restitution not only to me, but to my grandmother's estate for the money they had stolen from her. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," Judge Martinez said, "your theft from your elderly mother represents one of the most callous forms of elder abuse this court has seen. You will pay full restitution plus penalties, and you will be on supervised probation for 3 years. As the hearing concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but at the cost of completely destroying my relationship with my birth family. Emma would face years of consequences for her actions, and my parents would lose their comfortable retirement to pay for their crimes. But as I walked out of the courthouse with Sarah Chen, I realized something important. The family I had been trying so hard to preserve had never really existed. The people who truly loved me had been showing me through their actions, not their words. Mrs. Patterson was waiting for me on the courthouse steps along with Jake, who had driven 3 hours to be there for the hearing. My coworkers from the hospital had sent flowers and messages of support. These were the people who saw my worth and valued my presence in their lives. The legal battle was over, but my real life was just beginning. The first thing I did with my settlement money was something my grandmother would have loved. I hired contractors to renovate the house from top to bottom, not because it needed major repairs, but because I wanted to transform it from a place of painful memories into a true home filled with love and laughter. The kitchen got new cabinets and countertops, but I kept my grandmother's favorite teacup collection displayed in the glass front cabinets. The living room was repainted in warm colors that made the space feel welcoming and peaceful. I converted the spare bedroom into a home office where I could pursue the online nursing education degree I had always wanted to complete. Jake had been incredibly supportive throughout the legal proceedings, never once saying, "I told you so," about my family's true nature. One evening in late spring, as we sat on the newly renovated front porch, watching the sunset, he brought up something that had been on both our minds. "Regina, I need to apologize for how I reacted when you decided to move back here. I thought you were choosing them over us, but I understand now that you were choosing to do what was right. That's one of the things I've always loved about you." "You don't need to apologize, Jake. I understand why you were frustrated. I probably would have felt the same way in your position. Would you be interested in trying again, not rushing into anything, just seeing if we can build something real together?" Looking at this kind, patient man who had stood by me during the darkest period of my life, I realized that second chances were precious gifts that should not be wasted. "I'd like that very much." The changes in my parents' lives were dramatic and immediate. They were forced to sell their Florida retirement home for significantly less than its market value due to the urgency of paying restitution. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of Tampa, their comfortable retirement lifestyle completely upended by the consequences of their fraud. My mother called me once during this period, her voice small and defeated. "Regina, we're losing everything. The retirement community, our friends, our financial security. Was all this really worth destroying your family over money?" "Mom, I didn't destroy our family over money. You did that when you decided to steal from your dying mother and your daughter who had sacrificed everything to help you. I just refused to let you get away with it. We made a mistake. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us?" Forgiveness is something that has to be earned through changed behavior and genuine remorse. So far, all I've heard from you is self-pity about the consequences of your actions. I had to establish firm boundaries with my parents. They were not welcome in my home until they could demonstrate genuine understanding of how their actions had affected others. They needed to prove through their behavior, not their words, that they had learned from their mistakes. Emma's situation was perhaps the most dramatically altered. Her felony conviction meant that her dreams of working in the entertainment industry were essentially over. Background checks would reveal her fraud conviction, making her unemployable in most professional settings. She moved back to our hometown and took a job at a grocery store, the only place willing to hire someone with her criminal record. The contrast between her previous lifestyle and her new reality was stark and sobering. 6 months after the court hearing, Emma showed up at my door on a rainy Thursday evening. She looked different, humbler, with the artificial confidence completely gone from her demeanor. "Regina, I know I don't have any right to ask, but could we talk just for a few minutes?" I invited her in, noting how she looked around the renovated house with what seemed like genuine appreciation rather than the calculating assessment I remembered. "The house looks beautiful," she said softly. "Grandma Rose would have loved what you've done with it." "Thank you." Emma sat on the edge of my couch, her hands folded in her lap like a child who had been called to account for misbehavior. "I've been going to therapy as part of my probation requirements. It's helping me understand some things about myself that I never wanted to face, such as the fact that I never learned to work for anything. I always expected things to be given to me, and when they weren't, I thought I had the right to take them. I never considered how my actions affected other people because I only thought about myself." This was the first time I had ever heard Emma take genuine responsibility for her behavior without trying to blame someone else or minimize her actions. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued. "I know that would be unfair after everything I put you through, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, and I'm trying to become a better person." What does that look like for you? It looks like working an honest job even though it's not glamorous. It looks like paying my restitution on schedule even though it means I'm living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles most nights. It looks like volunteering at the senior center on weekends, working with people like Grandma Rose, who deserve respect and care, not manipulation. I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of the manipulative behavior that had characterized her for so long. But what I saw instead was exhaustion, genuine remorse, and the beginning of what might eventually become wisdom. Emma, I appreciate you telling me this, and I hope you continue working on yourself and building a life you can be proud of. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust takes time, and it requires consistent behavior over years, not months. I understand. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them. After Emma left that evening, I felt something I had not expected: hope. Not hope for our relationship to return to what it had been, because that version had been built on lies and manipulation, but hope that perhaps Emma might eventually become someone worthy of trust and respect. The transformation in my own life was remarkable. With the financial pressure removed, I was able to reduce my work hours at the hospital and focus on completing my nursing degree. I also started teaching CPR classes at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. Jake moved in 6 months later, but we took our time planning our future together. We both understood that relationships built on solid foundations of mutual respect and honest communication were worth the extra effort. Mrs. Patterson became like a second grandmother to me, sharing stories about my grandmother that I had never heard, and helping me understand the woman who had loved me enough to protect me, even from beyond the grave. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the scholarship fund I established at the local nursing school using part of my settlement money. The Rose Patterson Memorial Scholarship was awarded annually to students who demonstrated both academic excellence and commitment to caring for elderly patients with dignity and respect. The first scholarship recipient was a young woman named Amanda, whose grandmother had been a victim of family financial abuse. When I presented the scholarship at the nursing school's awards ceremony, I thought about how my grandmother's legacy was continuing to protect and nurture people long after her death. Standing in that auditorium surrounded by future nurses who would dedicate their lives to caring for others, I realized that my family's betrayal had ultimately led me to discover my true purpose. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving and helping others do the same. The house that had been the center of so much conflict had become a sanctuary where love and justice prevailed. And most importantly, I had learned the difference between family members who share your blood and family members who share your values. 2 years after that devastating family dinner, I stood in my grandmother's garden, now transformed into a beautiful space where I hosted community events every month. The rose bushes my grandmother had planted decades ago were blooming magnificently, their sweet fragrance filling the evening air as neighbors gathered for our monthly potluck dinner. Jake was grilling hamburgers on the back patio, chatting with Mr. Johnson from 3 houses down about baseball statistics. Mrs. Patterson sat in her favorite lawn chair, regaling a group of younger neighbors with stories about the neighborhood's history. Children ran through the sprinkler on the lawn, their laughter echoing through the summer evening. This gathering represented everything my grandmother had dreamed of for her home. She had always envisioned it as a place where people came together, where community was built and maintained, where love was shared freely without conditions or hidden agendas. Jake and I had married the previous spring in a ceremony held right here in the backyard, surrounded by the people who had supported us through our darkest moments. Mrs. Patterson had insisted on making the wedding cake a 3-layer masterpiece that she claimed was my grandmother's secret recipe. Our wedding photos showed a small but genuine celebration, with faces that reflected real joy and commitment. The legal changes I had helped implement were having a real impact on protecting other families from elder fraud. The local district attorney's office now had specialized prosecutors for these cases, and banks were required to have additional safeguards when elderly customers made large transfers or changes to their accounts. My parents had attempted reconciliation several times over the past 2 years, but their efforts always seemed focused on what they had lost, rather than understanding the pain they had caused. During our last phone conversation, my father had complained about their reduced circumstances and suggested that I could help them financially since I had done so well from the legal settlement. "Dad," I had told him, "the fact that you see my legal victory as me profiting rather than me protecting myself tells me you still don't understand what you did wrong. Until you can acknowledge the genuine harm you caused without focusing on your own losses, we don't have a foundation for rebuilding our relationship." Emma, however, had made remarkable progress. She had completed her probation successfully, paid her restitution in full, and had been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store where she worked. More importantly, she had maintained her volunteer work at the senior center and had started taking evening classes at the community college. She visited occasionally, always respectfully, and never with expectations or demands. During her last visit, she had brought photos of some of the elderly residents she worked with, sharing stories about their lives and challenges with genuine compassion. "I think I understand now why you fought so hard for this house," she had said, looking around the renovated living room. "It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about preserving Grandma Rose's memory and protecting the values she represented." "That's exactly right," I had replied, feeling cautiously optimistic about Emma's transformation. The nursing scholarship program had grown beyond my initial expectations. Local businesses had begun contributing, and we were now able to award 3 scholarships annually. The recipients stayed in touch, sharing their experiences and successes as they built careers dedicated to compassionate care. One evening, as I was reviewing applications for the upcoming scholarship awards, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, an elderly woman whose granddaughter had seen the news story about my case 2 years earlier. "Miss Regina, I hope you don't mind me calling. Your story gave my granddaughter the courage to speak up when my son was stealing from my bank accounts. The police were able to stop him before he took everything, and now I'm safe in a lovely assisted living facility where I'm treated with respect." Calls like that reminded me why the fight had been worth every moment of pain and conflict. My refusal to accept my family's betrayal had created ripple effects that protected other vulnerable people from similar abuse. Jake and I had started discussing having children, and the idea of raising a family in this house filled with so much history and love felt like the natural next chapter of our story. We talked about the values we wanted to pass on: integrity, compassion, standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, and understanding that real family is defined by love and respect, not just shared genetics. Mrs. Patterson, now 84 and still sharp as ever, had become our most trusted advisor on everything from gardening to life decisions. She often reminded me that my grandmother would be incredibly proud of the woman I had become and the choices I had made. "Your grandmother always said that adversity reveals character," she told me one afternoon as we sat on the front porch watching the neighborhood children play. "She knew you had strength inside you that you hadn't discovered yet. She just wished she could have been here to see you use it. As I reflected on the journey from that devastating family dinner to this peaceful evening, I realized that my parents' betrayal had been a terrible gift. It had forced me to discover my own strength, to establish boundaries, to fight for my worth, and to learn the difference between being loving and being taken advantage of. The house that had once represented obligation and sacrifice now represented choice and empowerment. Every room held memories of my growth and transformation. The kitchen where I had cried over those forged documents was now where I taught cooking classes for young adults aging out of foster care. The living room where I had confronted Emma was now where our book club met monthly to discuss stories of resilience and hope. Most importantly, I had learned that justice and forgiveness were not mutually exclusive. Holding people accountable for their actions was not about revenge. It was about creating boundaries that allowed genuine healing and growth to occur. Standing in my grandmother's garden that evening, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life because they valued who I was, not what I could do for them, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The family that had betrayed me had unwittingly led me to discover my true family. The people who showed love through their actions, who supported me during difficult times, and who celebrated my victories without jealousy or ulterior motives. My grandmother's legacy lived on not just in the roses that bloomed each spring, but in the values of dignity, strength, and love that now shaped every aspect of my life. She had protected me even from beyond the grave, and I was determined to pass that protection forward to others who needed it. The girl who had been given 48 hours to pack her life into boxes was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood her worth, defended her boundaries, and created a life filled with authentic love and genuine purpose. If you've ever faced betrayal from the people who were supposed to love and protect you, remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you their true character because it frees you to build the life you actually deserve. What would you do if you discovered your family had been planning to betray you behind your back? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if Regina's story inspired you to value yourself more highly. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people in their lives. Thank you for listening to Regina's journey of transformation and justice, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior.